The rain was relentless, battering against the sidewalks in a steady, rhythmic torrent. Sophie Evans clutched her umbrella tightly, her second-hand coat damp from the downpour. Each step toward the towering glass building of Reed Enterprises felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the crushing pressure of expectation. This job interview, the one that had taken her weeks to secure, felt like the last hope she had to pull herself from the suffocating depths of financial struggle. A coveted assistant position at one of the most prestigious companies in the city. If she could only land this, everything might change. Sophie adjusted the straps of her worn-out bag, mentally preparing herself. The weight of the bills piling up at home, the rent that was due, and the mounting pressure from her mother to find something stable in the city kept her on edge. It had been months since she had received a rejection letter, and the thought of yet another one made her stomach twist in knots. The rain plastered her hair to her face, and she could feel the wetness creeping down her back, but she kept moving forward, her mind focused on one goal: get the job. As she reached the grand glass doors of Reed Enterprises, she paused for a moment to take in the breathtaking sight of the building. An imposing structure that seemed to touch the sky, its sharp angles reflecting the gray skies above. Sophie took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The warmth from inside greeted her, but it did little to ease the nerves that had tightened her chest. The lobby was everything she had imagined. Sleek, polished marble floors, expensive-looking furniture, and the faint smell of fresh coffee in the air. It felt as if she had stepped into another world, one that she didn't belong to. She glanced around, trying to find the receptionist, but as her umbrella slipped from her hands, she turned too quickly, almost bumping into someone. Her eyes widened in shock as she looked up. Standing before her was a tall man in a tailored suit, his sharp features framed by dark, tousled hair. His gray eyes locked onto hers with a look that felt both intense and curious, as if he had been watching her for longer than a mere second. "Sorry," Sophie stammered, her face flushing as she quickly bent to retrieve her umbrella. The man chuckled softly, his lips curling into a faint smile. "No harm done," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Good luck in there." Sophie froze for a moment, her heart beating faster at the unexpected kindness in his voice. She nodded politely, unsure of what else to say, and quickly walked to the receptionist. But as she sat down in the waiting area, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about that encounter had stirred something deep within her. She had no way of knowing it then, but that brief interaction would be the start of a new chapter in her life. The sleek conference room at Reed Enterprises was cold in its elegance, every surface reflecting the pristine image of a high-powered corporate world. Sophie sat at the table, trying to calm her racing heart, but her nerves were like a swarm of bees trapped in her chest. She had been escorted to the conference room after a brief, impersonal greeting from the receptionist, and now she was left alone to wait for the interview to begin. Moments later, the door opened, and Sophie's breath hitched as the same man from the lobby walked in. Her mind raced. The tall figure, the gray eyes. He was the CEO, Nathan Reed. She hadn't realized that the man she had nearly bumped into was the very person she would be meeting today. Nathan's eyes met hers as he approached the head of the table, and for a moment, it felt as if the room had shrunk around them. Sophie tried to gather her composure as he took a seat across from her. He was everything she had imagined, self-assured, powerful, with an aura of authority that filled the space. He wasn't just the CEO of one of the most influential companies in the city. He was a man who seemed to command the world around him without saying a word. "Miss Evans, I trust you found the place all right?" Nathan's voice was smooth, and though it was formal, there was a slight warmth beneath it, an unexpected kindness that made Sophie feel a little more at ease. "Yes, thank you," she replied, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "The building is impressive." Nathan smiled, nodding slightly. "We like to think it reflects the standards we set here at Reed Enterprises." The interview began, and Sophie quickly found herself immersed in the questions, each one more daunting than the last. Nathan's gaze never wavered as he asked her about her past experience, her goals, and why she wanted to work for Reed Enterprises. Sophie felt a strange tension in the air, as if each of his questions carried more weight than just the answer itself. There was something about his presence that made everything feel more significant, almost as though her entire future was resting on every word she spoke. She answered as honestly as she could, speaking about her resilience, her determination to overcome obstacles, and her desire to prove herself. Nathan listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers, as if he were studying her, not just for the role, but for something deeper. Sophie couldn't help but feel a strange connection, a pull she couldn't explain. His questions, while professional, seemed to carry a sense of care, as though he genuinely wanted to understand who she was beyond the resume she had submitted. When the interview came to an end, Sophie stood to leave, but Nathan's voice stopped her. "Thank you for your time, Miss Evans. You've impressed me today." His tone was warm, but there was an underlying seriousness to his words. "I'll be in touch." As Sophie made her way to the door, she couldn't help but glance back at Nathan. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and in that instant, Sophie felt an odd sense of recognition. She quickly looked away, her heart pounding in her chest. It was absurd, she thought. She was here for a job, not to entertain fanciful thoughts. But even as she walked out of the building, she couldn't shake the feeling that this interview had changed something within her, something she didn't fully understand yet. Sophie sat on the edge of her worn-out couch in her small apartment, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The phone sat on the coffee table in front of her, a silent reminder that she was waiting for a call that could change everything. She had been through this before, waiting for the call back that never came, hoping for a chance that always seemed just out of reach. But this time, it felt different. She had given it her all in the interview. She had answered every question honestly, put her heart on the line, and made it clear that she was more than capable of handling the job. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at her. She glanced at the pile of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, the overdue rent notice that had arrived earlier that week. If she didn't get this job, she didn't know what would become of her. Sophie had grown up in a small town, where dreams of success were always just that, dreams. She had come to the city hoping to make something of herself, but the reality of living paycheck to paycheck had worn her down. Her phone buzzed, and her heart leaped in her chest. She snatched it up, her pulse racing. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but her intuition told her this was it. She answered quickly, trying to sound calm. "Hello? Sophie Evans?" The voice on the other end was smooth, authoritative, and familiar. It was Nathan Reed's voice. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. "Yes, this is Sophie," she replied, her voice shaky. "This is Nathan Reed," he said, his tone unexpectedly kind. "I wanted to personally let you know that you've been selected for the assistant position at Reed Enterprises. We were impressed with your qualifications and the drive you demonstrated in the interview. We'd like to offer you the job." Sophie's mind went blank for a moment. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest lifted in an instant. She couldn't believe it. "Thank you," she whispered, the words almost too small to express the relief she felt. "Thank you so much." "You're welcome," Nathan replied. "I'll have the details sent to you soon. Welcome to Reed Enterprises, Sophie." As she hung up the phone, tears welled up in Sophie's eyes. She had done it. She had finally done it. For the first time in months, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. This job, this chance, it was her new beginning. Sophie stood outside the grand building of Reed Enterprises on her first day, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She had hardly slept the night before, tossing and turning, wondering if she was truly ready for what lay ahead. The weight of the responsibility that came with the job was not lost on her. This wasn't just an ordinary assistant position. It was a chance to prove herself in a world that had never quite felt like home. The lobby of Reed Enterprises, with its polished floors and sleek design, was as impressive as she remembered. But this time, Sophie walked through it with a sense of purpose. She had been hired. She was here to work. Sophie was escorted to her desk by the receptionist, who gave her a polite but distant smile before leaving her to settle in. The office was everything Sophie had imagined, a place of high-end finishes, buzzing with the hum of efficient work. The employees moved quickly, speaking in clipped tones, dressed in sharp suits that made Sophie feel like an outsider. She had never been in a corporate environment like this before, and it was overwhelming, to say the least. But as she took a seat at her desk and set to work, something deep inside her stirred. This was the beginning of something new. She wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. Over the next few hours, Sophie fell into the rhythm of the office. She answered phone calls, organized schedules, and handled the day-to-day tasks with an efficiency that surprised even her. She could feel eyes on her every now and then, perhaps the curious glances of her colleagues, wondering how she had landed this position, but she kept her focus. This was her chance to shine, and she wasn't going to waste it. Throughout the day, Sophie's path crossed several times with Nathan. He moved through the office with the kind of commanding presence that could stop a room without him saying a word. His attention was always directed elsewhere, but Sophie couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on her for a fraction of a second whenever they passed each other. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Sophie felt it, and she couldn't deny the strange pull she felt toward him. There were moments when their gazes would meet across the room, and Sophie would quickly look away, as if to avoid drawing attention to the way her heart seemed to skip a beat. But there was no mistaking the connection she felt. It was a quiet, unspoken thing, but it was there, lingering in the background, making the day feel both exhilarating and unsettling. As the workday came to an end, Sophie found herself gathering her things, preparing to leave the office. She had made it through her first day, exhausted, but proud. As she reached the elevator, she turned to find Nathan standing by the door to his office, watching her with a look she couldn't quite read. His lips curved into a small smile when their eyes met. "Good work today, Sophie," he said, his voice calm, yet laced with a warmth that made her heart flutter. "Thank you," she replied, her voice slightly shaky as she stepped into the elevator. She pressed the button to the ground floor, feeling a sudden rush of nerves. Her day had been productive, but it wasn't just the work that had left her breathless. It was Nathan. There was something about the way he spoke to her, something that made her feel both seen and understood. And though she was determined to keep things professional, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more between them, something she wasn't ready to admit. The week passed in a blur of meetings, tasks, and the hum of office life. But Sophie couldn't shake the growing tension between her and Nathan. Every time they crossed paths, there was a certain electricity in the air. She had tried to brush it off as just her imagination, but the more time she spent in the office, the more she realized that the connection between them was undeniable. One Friday afternoon, just as Sophie was preparing to leave, she received an unexpected call. It was Nathan, asking her to meet him for dinner. "I'd like to discuss your progress here at Reed Enterprises," he said, his voice steady, but there was something in his tone that made Sophie's heart race. "Are you free tonight?" Sophie hesitated for a moment. A dinner with Nathan Reed? The thought made her pulse quicken. She had never imagined this kind of interaction with him. After all, he was her boss, and she was still adjusting to her new role. But there was something about the way he asked that made her want to say yes, even if it was just a professional conversation. "I'd be happy to meet," Sophie replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Where should I go?" Nathan provided the name of a fancy restaurant downtown, one that Sophie had only ever passed by on her way to work. The thought of dining at such an upscale place felt surreal, but she couldn't deny the flutter of excitement in her chest. It was just dinner, after all, a chance to discuss her work and get feedback from her boss. Nothing more. When Sophie arrived at the restaurant later that evening, she was immediately struck by its opulence. The soft lighting, the elegant decor. It felt like a world far removed from her usual routine. She felt slightly out of place in her modest dress, but when Nathan arrived, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. "Good evening, Sophie," Nathan greeted her with a warm smile as he led her to a table by the window. His presence, as always, seemed to command the room. Sophie did her best to compose herself, but the tension between them was undeniable. As they sat down to dinner, their conversation started off with the usual pleasantries, discussing her first few days at the office and the projects she had been assigned. Nathan's feedback was positive, and Sophie felt a surge of pride. But as the meal progressed, the conversation began to shift. Nathan opened up about his own journey, his rise to power, and the sacrifices he had made to build his empire. Sophie listened intently, captivated by his words. There was a vulnerability in Nathan that she hadn't expected. He spoke of the loneliness that often came with success, the price of ambition, and the challenges of leading such a vast corporation. As he spoke, Sophie couldn't help but notice how the intensity in his eyes softened, as if the corporate mask he wore during the day had slipped away. For the first time, Sophie felt like she was seeing Nathan as more than just the CEO. She saw the man behind the powerful title, someone who had worked hard for everything he had, but had also sacrificed a great deal to get there. By the end of the evening, the professional atmosphere had shifted into something more personal. They shared stories of their past, Sophie speaking about her difficult upbringing, the struggles she had faced, and the dreams she held onto, even when life had seemed unkind. Nathan, in turn, shared more about his own childhood, his journey to success, and the isolation that often came with being at the top. The evening ended with a lingering silence between them, a sense of understanding that had passed beyond the boundaries of their professional relationship. As Nathan paid the bill, he looked at Sophie with a smile that was both sincere and thoughtful. "I'm glad we had this chance to talk," he said quietly. "I think you'll do well here, Sophie." Sophie nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't sure what to make of the evening, whether it had been purely professional or something more, but one thing was certain. She felt closer to Nathan than ever before. The days following the dinner were filled with a growing tension that neither Sophie nor Nathan could ignore. Their interactions at work became more charged, subtle glances exchanged across the office, moments when their eyes met a little longer than necessary. Sophie tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that evening. Nathan had been kind, open, and unexpectedly vulnerable, and she couldn't help but wonder what it meant for their relationship moving forward. One afternoon, just as Sophie was finishing up a report, a note appeared on her desk. It was a simple piece of paper with one sentence written in neat handwriting. "Meet me on the rooftop after work." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Nathan had asked to meet her, away from the hustle and bustle of the office. There was no mistaking the significance of the request. The rooftop was a private space, one that offered a breathtaking view of the city below. It was a place for quiet moments, away from prying eyes. After a long day, Sophie made her way to the rooftop, her mind racing. When she arrived, Nathan was already there, standing by the edge, looking out over the city. The wind tousled his hair, and for a moment, he seemed lost in thought. "Sophie," he said, turning to face her as she approached. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her heart race. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversations, and I need to be honest with you." Sophie's stomach fluttered. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew this moment would change everything. "I can't deny that I feel something between us," Nathan continued, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "And I've tried to keep things professional, but I can't ignore what's growing between us." Sophie stood frozen, her heart thundering in her chest. She had felt it too, the undeniable pull that had been building ever since their first meeting. But she wasn't sure if it was wise to act on it. "I know this is complicated," Nathan said, stepping closer to her, "but I need to tell you how I feel. I can't pretend anymore." Sophie looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Nathan, we're both here for a reason. But this is your company. I don't want to complicate things." Nathan smiled softly, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "I don't want to complicate things either, Sophie, but I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you." And in that moment, Sophie knew things would never be the same again. The days following their rooftop conversation were a blur of confusion and anticipation. Sophie couldn't stop replaying Nathan's words in her mind. She had always known that there was something between them, something undeniable that pulled her closer every time they crossed paths. But now, with his confession hanging in the air, things felt different. The tension between them had become palpable, an invisible thread that tied them together, even as they tried to maintain their professional distance. At work, Sophie focused more intently than ever on her tasks. She couldn't afford to slip up. This job meant everything to her, and she wasn't about to let anything jeopardize it. But every time Nathan walked by, or their eyes met across the office, the air between them seemed charged, and Sophie found it hard to concentrate. Nathan, for his part, seemed determined to respect her space. He continued to lead the company with the same commanding presence he always had, his interactions with her remaining professional. But Sophie could see it in his eyes, in the brief moments when their gazes met, that he was still thinking about her, just as much as she was thinking about him. It was a constant undercurrent of emotion that neither of them could escape. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, Nathan approached Sophie as she was packing up her things. His presence seemed to fill the room, and for a moment, Sophie forgot how to breathe. "Walk with me?" he asked, his voice soft, but with an intensity that made Sophie's heart race. Sophie hesitated for only a second before nodding. She grabbed her coat and followed him out of the office, the familiar tension between them thick in the air. They didn't speak as they walked through the quiet streets, the sound of their footsteps the only noise between them. The city was quiet, its lights casting long shadows on the pavement. Nathan finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking about what you said, the complication of our relationship." Sophie stopped walking, turning to face him. "I don't want to lose this job, Nathan. I don't want to make things difficult for either of us." Nathan took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "I don't want that either. But I need you to know that I care about you, Sophie. This isn't just about the office or the company. It's about you and me." Sophie felt a rush of emotion, a mix of fear and longing. She wanted to let go, to give in to the pull between them, but the stakes were high. "I don't know what this means for me, Nathan. What does it mean for us?" Nathan reached out, gently taking her hand. "We'll figure it out. Together." The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through Sophie, but her mind was racing. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take this leap, but she also couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if it doesn't work?" Nathan smiled, his thumb brushing over her hand. "We'll take it one step at a time. No pressure." And for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt a sense of peace. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she knew she was ready to face it with Nathan by her side. As the days passed, Sophie and Nathan continued to navigate their growing connection. Their professional relationship was becoming harder to maintain with each passing moment. Sophie's colleagues had started to notice the subtle shifts in their behavior. The lingering glances, the way Nathan would ask for her opinion in meetings, the way their conversations seemed to carry an underlying tension. It didn't take long for the gossip to start. At first, it was just whispers, nothing overt, but Sophie could feel the eyes of her coworkers on her whenever she walked into a room. She tried to brush it off, telling herself that it didn't matter. But the pressure was mounting, and it was starting to affect her work. She could feel the stares, the judgment, and the questions that went unasked but were still present in the air. One afternoon, during a meeting, a colleague made a pointed comment about Sophie's work ethic, insinuating that her attention was elsewhere. The words hit Sophie like a slap to the face, and for a moment, she felt herself shrink under the weight of the accusation. It wasn't the first time she had been the subject of office gossip, but this time, it stung. The implications were clear. People were starting to assume that her success at the company had more to do with her relationship with Nathan than her skills. Nathan, who had been sitting across the table, didn't miss a beat. His eyes narrowed, and he spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "That's enough," he said, his tone laced with authority. "Sophie's work speaks for itself. She's an asset to this company, and I expect everyone to respect that." The room fell silent, and the colleague who had made the comment shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Nathan's defense of Sophie was both reassuring and unsettling. It was clear that he cared about her, but Sophie couldn't help but feel the weight of his actions. It was one thing to defend her. It was another to make it so public. As the meeting adjourned, Sophie walked out of the room, her mind spinning. Nathan caught up to her, his expression softening when he saw the strain in her eyes. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his voice laced with concern. Sophie nodded, but she didn't feel okay. She didn't know how to navigate the complexities of their relationship anymore. She had always prided herself on her independence, on the fact that she had made it this far on her own. But now, with the attention on her and Nathan, she felt like she was losing control. "I don't know if I can do this," Sophie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to ruin everything." Nathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You won't. We'll figure this out, Sophie. I'm not going anywhere. But even as he spoke those words, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship, no matter how much they cared for each other, was heading toward a crossroads. They couldn't continue to pretend that everything was fine, not when the stakes were so high. The tension finally reached its breaking point one evening after work. Sophie had been working late, trying to catch up on the mountain of tasks that seemed to grow by the day. She had barely noticed the time passing. But when she looked up, the office was nearly empty. The only person left was Nathan. He was standing near the elevator, waiting for her. Sophie's heart skipped a beat as she approached him. She knew what this moment was. She could feel it in her bones. The uncertainty, the tension, the fear of what was to come. It had all led them here. I need to talk to you, Nathan said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. Sophie swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. I know. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. I don't care about the rumors or what anyone thinks. I care about you, Sophie, and I'm tired of pretending that this, whatever this is between us, isn't real. Sophie looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had been denying. The truth was simple. She cared about him too, more than she had ever expected. I'm scared, Sophie confessed, her voice trembling. I'm scared of what will happen if we take this step. Nathan reached for her hand, gently holding it in his. I know you're scared. I am too. But I believe in us, Sophie. I believe in what we have. Sophie took a deep breath, the words coming to her with a clarity she hadn't felt before. I want to take that leap, Nathan. I want to see where this can go. With that, they stood there, together, at the edge of a new beginning. No more second-guessing, no more holding back. They were ready to face whatever came next, together. And as they kissed for the first time, a kiss that was soft and tentative, but full of promise, Sophie knew that everything was about to change. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was ready to face it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Sophie and Nathan's relationship, once a whispered secret in the corners of Reed Enterprises, had blossomed into something both undeniable and beautiful. They had taken the leap, and though the road ahead was uncertain, they navigated it together with a newfound sense of purpose. Sophie found herself growing not only in her personal life, but also in her career. Her confidence soared, her work ethic admired by her peers, and her relationship with Nathan, though still discreet, had become something that gave her strength. Nathan had been nothing short of supportive, offering her the space to grow while also standing by her side whenever she needed him. He respected her boundaries and was always there to listen, to offer advice, or simply to hold her when the world outside seemed overwhelming. And with every passing day, Sophie felt her fears ebbing away. The pressure of office gossip began to fade as people saw how truly capable and dedicated she was, not just as Nathan's assistant, but as a rising star in the company. It wasn't long before the whispers and rumors ceased altogether. The office had started to accept their relationship, perhaps even admire it in some way. They had proven, in their own way, that love wasn't a distraction but a source of strength. And though their professional and personal lives continued to coexist with some challenges, Sophie had never felt more grounded. One sunny Saturday morning, Nathan surprised Sophie with a trip to the countryside. It was a spontaneous getaway, something he had planned as a way to give them both a much-needed break. Sophie, always the planner, was thrilled by the idea of getting away, even if just for a few days. The rolling hills and vast open skies were a far cry from the hustle and bustle of city life, and Sophie reveled in the quiet solitude that surrounded them. They spent the day exploring the countryside, walking hand in hand through fields of wildflowers and sharing stories of their pasts. It was a chance for them to relax, to breathe without the weight of expectations, and to simply enjoy each other's company. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape, Nathan led Sophie to a beautiful, secluded field. Sophie looked around, taking in the view of the sprawling fields, the vibrant colors of the setting sun painting the sky. It was the perfect moment, calm, peaceful, and full of promise. Nathan stopped in the middle of the field and turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and determination. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as he opened it to reveal a sparkling diamond ring. "Sophie," Nathan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You've changed everything for me. You've shown me what it means to be truly happy, to love and be loved without fear or hesitation. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, to build a future together, no matter where life takes us." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes as she stared at the ring, her heart pounding in her chest. She had dreamed of a moment like this, but she never imagined it would come to her in such a simple, perfect way. The man she loved, the man who had been her rock and her confidant, was asking her to spend forever with him. Sophie's voice trembled as she fought to find the words. Yes, Nathan. I want that too. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Nathan smiled, a smile that radiated pure happiness, and slipped the ring onto Sophie's finger. As they embraced, the world around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them, together in this moment of pure joy. The love story that had begun in the rain, with uncertain steps and hesitant hearts, had blossomed into something extraordinary. Sophie knew that their journey was far from over, that there would be challenges and obstacles ahead. But as she looked into Nathan's eyes, she was certain of one thing. No matter what came their way, they would face it together. Their love was not just a chapter in their lives. It was the foundation of everything that was yet to come. And as the sun set on that beautiful countryside evening, Sophie felt a deep sense of peace and contentment, knowing that this was only the beginning of their future together. Forever had never felt so real. Years passed, and Sophie and Nathan's love continued to grow in ways they had never imagined. They had built a life together, a life that was rich not only in success but in love, understanding, and mutual respect. Sophie had risen through the ranks at Reed Enterprises, proving that her capabilities and determination were the foundation of her success, not just her relationship with Nathan. And Nathan, who had once been a solitary figure in his empire, had found something priceless in Sophie, a partner who grounded him, who encouraged him to dream beyond business, and who loved him with a depth that he had never thought possible. They traveled the world together, exploring new places, meeting new people, and building memories along the way. But despite all the adventures, it was always the quiet moments that meant the most, the evenings spent in each other's company, the shared smiles over a cup of coffee, the small gestures that spoke volumes. They had learned, through all the challenges they faced, that love wasn't just about grand gestures. It was about consistency, patience, and the willingness to weather life's storms side by side. Sophie often thought back to that rainy day when she had walked into Reed Enterprises, uncertain and unsure of her place in the world. Little did she know that day would mark the beginning of a journey that would change everything: her career, her heart, and her life. Nathan had become not just her love but her greatest ally, her confidant, and her best friend. Together, they had created something beautiful, a life filled with love and endless possibilities. And in the quiet moments, when the world outside seemed to pause, Sophie would look at Nathan, knowing that no matter what came their way, they would always have each other. They had built something strong, something real. Their love had withstood the test of time, and Sophie knew that it would continue to grow, no matter the challenges ahead. For Sophie and Nathan, their love story was not just a chapter in their lives, it was there forever. And as they stood hand in hand, looking toward the future, Sophie couldn't help but smile, knowing that this was only the beginning of the many beautiful chapters still to come. Thank you so much for following Sophie and Nathan's journey from start to finish. I hope their love story has brought you wonderful emotions and meaningful lessons. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and share the video so we can continue bringing you more exciting stories. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next story.